Welcome to the Fantasy NASCAR podcast brought to you by racefortheprize.com. Let's talk Kansas trucks, review salaries, find the value picks at the bottom that we are going to be circling around, and then who will be the best point per dollar play at the top. This is my favorite podcast of the week, always is. The Kansas exploration of random new guys really shows the flexibility and depth of the spreadsheet that you can get at racefortheprize.com. $30 for the month of May. Venmo, PayPal, Cash App. Send it over. Give you access to the sheet. Going to save you time. Going to make it easy. And you're going to have a lot of fun in the process playing fantasy NASCAR. Going to have an exciting Saturday night. Get your Saturday started with some practice. Watch some Derby. Put together your lineups and win some money on Saturday night. Racefortheprize.com. Love having you here. Join us. Let's start at the bottom like we always do and just get in depth with these drivers. We're not playing Jennifer Jo Cobb. We love Jennifer Jo Cobb, but we're not playing her. Pretty simple. We'll cross that one off. The thing that strikes me as odd, and I can't believe this, in what world do we live in where Lawless Allen and Jennifer Jo Cobb are separated by $100 in salary? That is inexplicable, unbelievable. First of all, what is the disrespect that Lawless Allen gets? It doesn't make any sense. For him to be the second lowest driver doesn't make any sense. For him to be priced near Jennifer Jo Cobb doesn't make any sense. I know I sometimes seem to be a Lawless Allen homer, but the Ram trucks are better than they had been in the past. Lawless Allen has put together decent races for Nice. Lawless Allen has been acceptable this season. He's been good at Kansas. He's been optimal a lot at Kansas. If you listen to my previous podcast at the channel, like those babies, subscribe, recruit more people to join us. So, I mean, what box doesn't he check at 5,100? You look at his rating. He was a top 20 driver at Texas. Top 22 at COTA, where we expected him to run well. Even when he wasn't great, he's better than a $5,100 driver. Now, that's his driver rating. Typically in the trucks, through attrition and survival, you're going to finish a little bit better than where you run as long as you don't wreck out. Now, he sometimes wrecks out, but look, 11th at Texas was ultimately where he finished because he was able to run in the top 20 and just make it through to the end of the race. These are not the greatest results, right? He is still a $5,100 driver. He is still Lawless Allen, but he will be in play. He will be on our board. A lot of it will be determined by his starting position. But when we're looking at that C class, the backpack, who might finish the best, or at the very least maximize fantasy points in that C class at the end, 2 to 3 laps down, probably 2 laps down, Wallace Allen's definitely there. Wallace Allen, obviously, as we witnessed at Texas, has the ability to hang on to that lead lap at Kansas, especially when we look at his recent results at Kansas. So, again, when we're looking at value, we're not necessarily comparing value to the top tier, to the top pack. We look at the backpack, and then we see, well, who can win amongst the C class? And then even within that C class, we need to ask ourselves, who can finish the best among this group of drivers racing against each other, but also who has the opportunity to score the most fantasy points? And that's going to be based a little bit on place differential. And that'll definitely be a factor once we see. But where we stand right now, I like Lawless Allen a lot. And also, I believe he will be competing in the ARCA race. So keep your eyes on that Friday afternoon. Getting some extra reps. Been to Kansas before. I don't know if Ram is really necessarily trending up, but they are competitive in that C class. Thad Moffitt deserves a little bit of discussion, simply because we have seen him have some poor qualifying efforts where the truck just dies on him, and then we worry about the capability of that truck, and maybe there is this general sentiment, it's not a good team, it's not a good truck, it's not a good driver, and there's always the worry or concern of mechanical situations. But if we ultimately look and see where he goes in these races, he is finishing the races. The truck is surviving. He is not good, but the results haven't been as bad as one might expect. To get 27th at Martinsville, 26th at Bristol, 25th at Las Vegas, 27th at Atlanta. Yeah, he's finishing 3 laps down, but he is finishing these races. He and Spencer Boyd are kind of in a similar situation where I think for whatever reason, Boyd would trust the equipment a little bit more, and he has a lot more experience in just out there turning laps. But Moffitt is pretty much replicating the same thing, just out there turning laps. And through attrition and just making sure that the truck gets to the end of the race. And these are basically two brand new teams. And so they are really just trying to get laps and starting to build a program. And you can kind of see that in their results. They're running around 30th each week. And then because they're not in the wrecks, except for last time around when Moffitt was the very first wreck, they're getting a 27th place finish. Now, when we look at our C class and try to see who's going to finish towards the top of that, Boyd and Moffitt are not in that consideration. However, they may get a slight bump or edge if they are starting dead last, so that if they finish halfway through that C class, they might actually score more points than a Lawless Allen, because Lawless Allen starts closer to the front. And for that reason, we can't continue to just ignore Boyd and Moffitt. They're always going to be that slight fringe play if, in fact, they do qualify dead last. However, with a much smaller pool of drivers of only 32 this week, it does make it much more difficult to roster those two guys. When there's 36 drivers and you finish 27th and you go 36 to 27, works a lot better than going 31 to 27. So, to go back, yes, in general, we do need to put Moffitt and Boyd on the board because of their style at certain races, and this would be one of them. But the factor that's going to hurt them the most is that we do have a smaller field, and those are place differential points that they possibly could have had. And there could be this belief that still in DFS NASCAR minds, I'm just going to play the guy in the back. Well, the back isn't quite the back this week. So there might be a little bit of an edge there. Oh, Moffitt's starting last. I can probably make this work. That's not the same as Moffitt starting last if there's 36 cars in the field or trucks in the field. So there may be a little bit of an edge in crossing them out completely, but it is something I like to do here because this is my favorite podcast of the week, where we dig deep and really get into some of the racing. That Moffitt and Boyd are people we want to think about moving forward. But again, field size might matter a little bit. Mason Maggio jumping in the AM22 truck / Ray. It's a Rayum truck. Rayum bought the AM22, has been racing it with connection with Sawinski / Tim Self. This originally was a Tim Self car with Austin Wayne, and then they kind of started bringing in new drivers, and then Sawinski came up from ARCA, and they kind of did their thing. Now those guys are mainly in the Xfinity series with Haley Deegan, but they do still have some connections, but mainly for all intents and purposes, it's a Rayum truck. And it hasn't been too bad, to be quite honest. And I've got a link in here for it. Let me see if I can pull it up this way. I thought I had a link in here for it. Well, my link's not showing it. Let me pause and pull up the link. I did have a link. It's over here under Rayum. So we've got the Sawinski, but we can actually look specifically at the 22 truck, what it's done in 2024. And it finished 28th with Keith McGee, your Alaskan driver, not the greatest, but 28th at Texas, not terrible for a back marker. 28th at Martinsville with Malozzi, who, not getting into that. I don't understand the whole thing with there. The other people are dogging on the guy. 21st at Coda. 32 McGee, 27 McGee, 21 McGee, 12th at Daytona. Probably don't want to overreact to the plate races, but kind of, I would say, a step above Boyd, a step above Thad Moffitt in the back. And Maggio, if we look at some of his results, the two races this season weren't that bad, to be quite honest with you. And they are in a former KBM truck, but it was a plate truck. Running position, not great, but again, a guy who's just basically has a thrown together ride, probably just out there riding, playing it safe. Ultimately gets 25th at Atlanta, 29th at Bristol. Is really not bad for Maggio at all in a rental truck where they're playing it safe. His equipment's maybe a little bit better. His approach might be a little bit more aggressive. He's not someone we can completely write off. Again, the smaller field probably hurting these guys. Do I think he'll be the best of the C class? No. We want place differential, but how much can we really get out of him? We can pull up Maggio's stats and look a little closer here and see what he has done previously. If you look at his Xfinity races, I'm not going to pull those up because they're all basically mechanical failures. His one finish was in a car alone car outside the top 30. So there's nothing really you can read into there. We look at Maggio's truck races with Rayoum, with Sawinski. A 27th at Gateway, not bad. A couple outside of the 30s. 27th at Kansas in 2023. Not terrible. Probably can finish a little bit better than a Boyd, a little bit better than a Moffitt in that C class. Still not really that excited about that play. You're probably looking here at Kansas, a 35th, a crash. But if you actually look at the lap by lap data in the fantasy NASCAR spreadsheet, or you just simply look at the notes that I provided, he was in 23rd place in this same truck deep into the race before he got involved in that wreck. A 22nd place finish, if he does start 32nd, then yeah, he could maximize points in the C class, and it's someone we need to consider. Mason Massey, we talk about him every week. A young truck. Young trucks ain't what they used to be, but they're not absolutely terrible. We'll pull up some of his previous results, and we'll look at what he did at Kansas in the Xfinity Series. He's got a wreck, but he does last year in the fall Xfinity race at Kansas, running for Bobby Dotter, a 16th place finish. That's something worth noting. So he does have experience at this track, has run well at this track. It is a young truck, so it should be able to run towards the middle or top of the C class. He's in play as well. Massey, because they have speed, they are running every week. Not necessarily completely dependent on starting position, because he can actually maximize finishing position and hang in there, and maybe the best of the drivers that we've talked about so far, aside from Lawless Allen, who I think is underpriced once again. But it's always dangerous because Lawless is not flawless. But 5,100, tons of savings, has competed this year. Again, if we look at Lawless Allen's stats this season, and we look at his driver rating, this is definitely a good enough speed to be the fastest in the C class. But if he starts too close to the front, I think he does hurt some of that value and ultimately just chase the place differential in the C class. Timmy Hill and Tyler Hill always come out and run well at Kansas. They have been optimal plenty of times in previous Kansas races. They know what they're doing. They know how to get through this race. I do not expect them to finish on the lead lap, and when they have been in the optimal lineup, they haven't been on the lead lap. So don't worry about that as much. The concern is, can they compete in the C class? And they have demonstrated in the past that they can, and they've also shown in the past that they can score fantasy points. And with only 32 car trucks in the field, you really don't have to show a lot in practice. You really don't have to go out there and rip it in qualifying. And that means Joe Cobb is absolutely going to start dead last. She doesn't have to push to try to get into this field. So she'll be in the field, and she'll just take it and play it safe. And I could even see Timmy Hill and some of these other drivers not really showing much speed in practice or qualifying, and in a competition to see who can be slowest in qualifying. But in the race, Hill should be able to be faster than what he is in practice. And I don't expect him to compete with the field, but to be close in that C class. He's still cheap. Holmes is a better truck, as we've mentioned plenty of times before in the podcast. This is technically allied Aspire. You got Mike Shiplet as a crew chief. Brett Holmes has put together pretty good results at Kansas in the past. Not great, but getting through the race, hanging in there. Results haven't been that great this year. Not really getting finishes better than where he runs. I've expected a little bit more, but you go back to Las Vegas, intermediate track, probably the closest in comps that we have to this racetrack. 17th driver rating, ends up finishing 12th. Texas is Texas, so we don't really need to worry about that one as much. Maybe though. There was a lot of green flag runs. Would like to have seen more out of Holmes. Didn't happen. Again, he is still just a C-class driver that occasionally has a good day. He throws some cautions and restarts. Maybe Holmes shines a little bit, but he has equipment that's probably better than Hill, probably better than Massey, more experience with his team. Should be right there fighting in that C-class. Ultimately, starting position will be a factor that we cook in. Can't write him off. Same can be said for Matt Mills, although he's been pretty disappointing. It is an East truck. It should have more speed than Holmes, Hill, and Massey. A lot of Mills' problems have been bad luck. He has been very unfortunate in many races this season. But even when he has gone through a race, and it's been few and far between where he has run a full complete race, it's just not been the best in East truck. The speed that Mills has at times looks good, but you need to be able to demonstrate speed for an entire race. And when you look at what Curry has done, it's not close. When you look at what Caden Honeycutt has done in an East truck, it's not close. Mills is out there basically renting a ride with his JF Electric sponsorship once again. What he did for years with BJ, it's what he did for years in the Xfinity series. There will be a day where he occasionally has the sun shine upon him. But we've seen enough of Mills to know that we don't really want to go there unless he can maximize place differential, which I don't expect to happen in a race where Boyd, Moffitt, Joe Cobb, Maggio are almost more than likely guaranteed to fill out the 29, 30, 31, and 32, where there's no pressure to qualify. They're going to take it easy. And so Mills, Holmes, Hill, very unlikely, maybe Hill, that they're going to be starting very deep in the pack. And so then when we look at that C class, there's just not going to be a lot of place differential for Matt Mills or even Brett Holmes or even Mason Massey to that extent. Because I almost guarantee that Maggio, Boyd, Moffitt, and Cobb, with a small field, will just go ahead and say, give us our spots outside the top 30. Then we've got drivers who really need those extra place differentials starting 27, 28. And then on top of that, you might have driver one or two that have an issue during qualifying that push some of these other guys a step forward, and that really hurts them. I mean, Mills, Holmes, Hill can all compete in that C class, but we have to make sure that we're factoring in, but when it comes down to those drivers 2 laps down battling at the end, oh, Mills was the fastest, but he started too close to the front. We got to factor in place differential when we're making that value pick. Daniel Dye, 6,200 is stupid again. Similar to Lawless Allen. No respect for Daniel Dye. This is a Bill McAnally truck. It is a top-tier truck. Daniel Dye is in the top pack. He is not a backpack driver. He is not a C-class driver. Finished 13th at Kansas last year. And then last week, in our last race at Texas, he was the 7th highest rated driver. He ran in the top 10 all day. He finished 6th. He's 6,200. Now, normally, we don't really want to consider a value play that could be starting towards the front, which this truck is fast enough that it should start towards the front. But at 6,200, if Dye doesn't get any place differential points and gets a top 10, it works. I mean, look, if I just, and ignore these projections, well, actually 15th. If he finishes 10th with no place differential, 5.5x, that's pretty good. I'm like, oh, I don't know, I need 6x. Again, what we need is the best point per dollar play in comparison to the other point per dollar plays. And if these C-class drivers, Mills, Holmes, Hill, can't really get any place differential, and they're locked 2 laps down so they can't really get finishing position points at the same time, then they don't really score any points. Unless this thing turns into a madhouse, right? They're not very efficient point per dollar plays. Unless it's a madhouse, and the junkers finish where the junkers should, and the C-class battles it out, but they can't really maximize any place differential because they can't start deep in the field, then it ends up being a value pick that starts closer to the front that's just cheap. And Daniel Dye definitely fits that mold And you also probably will get a little bit of leverage because everyone just typically wants to go to the back. It may not necessarily factor in that this is a smaller field. And this back of the field was set up by guys that didn't really want to qualify. And so that the value really can't score any points given the circumstance. And they don't adjust, leaving Daniel Dye, which, yes, on paper, it's a value pick starting towards the front. That's scary. I can't do that. But if you put $8,200 on Daniel Dye and he's starting towards the front, you have a completely different perception. And arguably, you could give him $8,200 based on his last result at Texas, given that is a Bill McAnally truck. You just got to kind of look at things differently. That's why I love doing this Truck Series podcast, having these different angles and perspectives to look at and to be able to dig real deep. I know some people don't want to dig super deep into this stuff and just pick this guy, that guy sucks, talk ownership and leverage. And ownership and leverage is cool because we just talked about that a little bit, but we also always try to put that into context and talk about the actual racing. Really like that play. Cameron Waters, supercar guy from overseas, did get a race recently over at Martinsville. Did I put a note on? He was 200, I think it was 20th. I think he was running around 20th before his crash at Martinsville, so not bad. Be interesting to see. It is a Thor truck, although I will say that Thor trucks have not been particularly good this season. When Matt Crafton is leading the charge at Thor, it's a bit of a concern. Majeski's been fine. I think I just have higher expectations for Majeski. I expected him to be, again, a championship contender. He hasn't really demonstrated that yet. But if you look at his overall rating rank this season in and out, it's okay. But he's not a guy leading a lot of laps. So maybe I'm giving Thor a little bit too much hate based on him not leading laps. Well, Kyle Busch is out here to lead laps and taking stuff away. And Eckes is very good and Heim is very good. And so, everybody can't lead laps. But overall, and then Ben Rhodes just doing Ben Rhodes thing. So maybe Thor isn't as bad, but they're clearly not demonstrating or powering away from the field. Tricon looks better. McAnally looks better. Spire looks better. But still, we should see a decent truck from Cam Waters at 6,300. It is risky because he just doesn't have any NASCAR experience. At an intermediate track, maybe this is a little bit easier of a race to jump into, play it safe, but he's not giving you too much savings. He's more than likely not going to start towards the back. How close to the front do you think he can work his way? I think he starts and finishes probably about where, in the same spot. Whereas I can get the same from Dye, but I think Dye, if they both start and finish in the same spot, then what's the difference? Well, Cameron Waters can probably start around 21st and finish 21st. Dye can start close to the top 10 and finish close to the top 10. That's the difference. Bailey Curry having a pretty good season. Probably the best in the top of the mid-pack. Definitely above that C class. Can finish on the lead lap. However, he will start much closer to the front. And he does have the ability to get up there into the top 15. Kansas results haven't been great, but you look at his driver rating this season, those are lead lap type runs. We get some cautions at the end and a restart, and he can benefit from some place differential plays. Most recently, 18th at Texas, that's the lead lap. Really does give him the opportunity at the very end to get some extra gains and be a driver that finishes much better than where he runs. Hasn't really taken advantage of that yet, but he has to a little bit, right? Got 4 spots better at Texas. 5 spots better at Bristol. Had his issues at Las Vegas, got into a wreck, so you can pretty much write that one off. Other than that issue at Las Vegas, that early spin, he's been very solid. The niche trucks have really been the best of the backpack. They've had a couple years where probably didn't have the best drivers or the best funding after the Chastain boom. But they are getting back on track with a couple seasons of Bailey Curry. Maybe Mills' money's helping them out. I also think that they benefit from the next guy that we are going to talk about jumping in the truck every once in a while. But clearly, top of the backpack, if not a top-tier team. they're right there on that edge, right there around 20th. And probably they are a top-tier team when we factor in Caden Honeycutt, who, again, I've been talking about for quite a while now. And just another one of those things that I've been saying that people laughed at me for, because I look at the late models. I look at, the grassroots asphalt series. I was dismissed, made fun of for digging into the stats. People don't like that I do research. People just want picks, computer talking points, simulation stuff, I guess. Or that's what people like to do. I like to look into the races. I look in the stats. I like to read the news reports. And so I pushed a narrative of you need to start looking at the late models. You need to put some respect on the Cars Tour. You need to look at these asphalt series. Always have. Always been diving into the Salems, the Hickories, looking at those results and saying, hey, this could translate over. Cool. Some of these even obscure ARCA races. And now you're starting to see articles about, guess what? Dirt racing led to a bunch of racers recently. Now, is NASCAR shifting to the next wave of talent coming from the late model series? Is Junior Motorsports Cars Tour the new breeding grounds for the next crop of drivers? And the answer is yes. I've been saying it all along, and now everyone's eating their words and realizing, oh yeah, I guess he was on to something. Always at the cutting edge. Yeah, I was on to something. Junior can identify talent, always has been able to, and he's brought them through the ranks. And we're seeing some more of that talent coming through. He's got a new guy coming out today. I don't know who it's going to be. It'll be very interesting to see. Honeycutt fits that mold of a Cars Tour guy that had success and is working his way up. And he has been strong in the Xfinity Series, had a really good race at Dover last week in the Xfinity Series. Been good in his Truck Series races. You look at what he's done this year, running for Nice. Top 10 driver ratings at Atlanta, at Bristol, 12th at Martinsville. Those are challenging tracks. Those are challenging tracks to just jump in and run. Pretty impressive, guys. And oh, by the way, his crew chief is Phil Gould. Gould is the guy who would do Chastain's races. He's the best crew chief at Nice. This is their top truck. Honeycutt is good at 6,500 so far. I would argue he's the best driver and the best truck so far down here. And if we can play Daniel Light 6,200 starting close to the front, we absolutely can play Caden Honeycutt starting close to the front. Let's pull up some of his stats. One of the things about this podcast that I enjoy myself is doing the research, but I also believe that these guys need to be talked about and discussed more. The NASCAR Truck Series doesn't really receive much of a spotlight. And then the Honeycutts, the Currys. Who's talking about these guys? Well, I am. If you want conversations about the Truck Series, this is the place to go. So look at some of his Truck Series races throughout the years. See what he has done, and maybe not always the best equipment, but top 10s, top 20s for Young, running for Stephen Lane's on point. Not the best truck during that time, but still pulling out some top 15s. Very solid. We can quickly go back, look at some, we'll look at his ARCA stuff here in a second. You can see his late model, 2 wins, 8 top 5s. Very solid in that series. The Snowball Derby runs, 5th place finish in the Snowball Derby. Pretty good, guys. It's a very competitive race, which I believe this year will be on Flow Racing, so you don't have to buy the pay-per-view. That's pretty freaking exciting. Let's see what he's done at ARCA. Has he run at Kansas City? He has not, and his ARCA races aren't really that great, but again, he's running for his own team. He doesn't have one of like the Venturinis or the JGRs that dominate these races. So when you're running your own one-time ride, you really don't expect much from an ARCA race. At least he's got plenty of experience. Not really worried about it. That's the Honeycutt stats if you want. I like what I've seen. You can find enough Honeycutt data in your research. Again, 3 races, average driver rating of 8th. I like it. Ty Dillon struggling with Rackley, new crew chief, new team from the ground up. Not too surprised to see it. And here's a couple of the reasons why Dillon's not able to replicate Matt DiBenedetto's results. 1, crew chief change. 2, DiBenedetto's a better driver. 3, which I think ultimately is the bigger factor, is that, look, again, a lot of Ty Dillon's success, and this is pretty clear. When he was good in the Xfinity Series, he had a top-tier car. When he was good in the Truck Series, he had a top-tier RCR ride. When he was in the Geico car in the Cup Series, he was just out there. He'd have a good race every once in a while, but without a competitive advantage in terms of equipment, he's nothing special. No disrespect, but those are just the facts. And even in some part-time Xfinity rides with competitive equipment, he really did not get much of the job done. His Xfinity Series run with RCR was really not that exceptional either. You put him in lesser equipment, it's not going to work. But the bigger thing that I would argue is that this racing package in the Truck Series, obviously it's high drag, it's drafting, it's full throttle, it's a different style of racing. What style of racing is it comparable to? Well, it's truck racing. But you could say it also is very similar to the 2019-2020 package that the Cup Series used, that underpowered car, the spoiler, the IROC type era. Well, guess who was really good, or at least adapted well to that? Matt DiBenedetto. DiBenedetto was pretty solid in that style of racing. And so when DiBenedetto jumps down into the Truck Series, it's a similar package. And so it wasn't a hard transition for DiBenedetto to go from, or to jump into the series, because he had raced in it before and been pretty good. And I would argue that DiBenedetto was able to get a lot better results out of his Rackley truck simply because the package suited him. And it's quite possible that Dillon, not being the greatest driver, maybe not liking this package all that much, is not able to replicate DiBenedetto's results. And Dillon's just getting what this truck deserves, and DiBenedetto and his crew chief, former Chad Kendrick, were able to get much more out of the truck. Make sense? Hopefully. Dean Thompson's going to be running the ARCA race. It is a Tricon truck. He did finish 15th at Kansas, but Dean Thompson always scares me, terrifies me, worries me. It's always capable of a top 15, but Dean Thompson is always capable of not getting that done. Tons of racing experience. He's been around for quite a while, gets his Tricon rides, gets his Nice rides, occasionally will pop, but he's not giving any savings. And there's, I would argue, maybe more risk with Dean Thompson than Lawless Allen. Former teammates. Jake Garcia at 7,000 with McAnally last year, finished 11th and 8th. Now a Thor, which is looking like maybe a little bit of a downgrade and change. But also that change just could be because of change. You know, switching teams, Thor transitioning it a little bit. Maybe by the end of the year, we'll have a different story. Garcia's a decent racer, but I don't think we're there yet. And I don't think we're there yet enough for $7,000. We look at his results this year, back of the top tier. He's going to be running around 15th. He could snap a little bit of a good finish at the end, but at 7,000, he's not really saving as much. He is going to be slightly in play because he will more than likely hang on to that lead lap and be right there at the end. He might slide into our lineups. Can't completely eliminate him, but we're not super excited about it. I'd much rather take a little bit more savings with the Bailey Curry, who could be on the lead lap, Daniel Dye, who should be on the lead lap. And I might be taking some extreme value, and with the extreme value, then I'm paying up for someone else that can maximize finishing position, where I don't know if this is really a race where he can get into the top 10. I know he got top 10s last year, but I don't think his Thor ride is quite a top 10 ride this year. So I save at the bottom, allows me to pay up to maximize finishing position. I don't know if I can get there with Garcia. I guess he's starting position-wise. Chase Purdy, with his Bama Buggy sponsorship, probably continuing to rent rides, gets a solid ride with Spire. Jason Trinchier, formerly of Colleague, should have decent speed, but I don't think he's much more of an upgrade over Jake Garcia. Again, top tier team, should be on the lead lap if he can avoid an issue, but we never necessarily can count on that with Chase Purdy. I would argue that Jake Garcia is a better driver. I would much rather go to Garcia. And similarly, I don't know how far towards the front these guys can really finish. I wouldn't be surprised to see both starting in the teens and then ultimately saying, look, they could have a good race, but how far forward can they get? And ultimately just them not being good point per dollar plays. Tanner Gray, maybe a little bit more. Obviously, he has plenty of experience. He will be in the ARCA race. He was a big play last race at Texas because he started dead last, so that worked. And where did he ultimately finish that Texas race? He ran in 20th. Got to finish much better. Again, though, that was because he started in the back, so he had a lot of laps that get factored in where he was working his way through the field. Should always be a top 15 driver. When we look at these three and say who can get the best finish, it's really not much different. Maybe Gray is a spot or two better. You're going to spend a little bit more on Gray. I really see the only way that these three drivers that are in play is because that they're starting deeper in the field. If I had to choose between Gray, Purdy, and Garcia, I would blindly pick the driver that's starting deeper in the field. And that's not going to change. And you can put Mosak into that conversation as well. Now, Mosak might have a little bit more upside considering this is the number one Spire truck with Brian Patty at the helm. This truck just dominated at Texas with, it was Kyle Busch, but it's a fast truck. Now let's look into Mosak. Now he will be running the ARCA race. Let's dive into his stats a little bit. And we can look specifically what he has done at ARCA. I think this is his ARCA Kansas stats. Now, this is just him in general. We'll look at his Xfinity races. Ran all last year for Hunt. Halfway decent. You look not the greatest at the beginning of the year, what you would expect from a young driver. Really starts to come into his own at the end. I mean, I guess you got to give him some credit for fifth place finish at Watkins Glen. But then 14th at Kansas last year, 14th at Bristol, top 20 at Las Vegas. Sure, he has plenty of poor performances, but did start to turn it around a little bit, but not enough to keep his job at Hunt. Either way, he is a promising young driver, and we got to see what he can eventually do. Let's pull it back up because I want to show you his ARCA races. So he's got 18 ARCA races. And we'll see that he finished 11th at Kansas in 2011, 5th at Kansas in 22, running for Stacey Holmes, who has a decent little ARCA program, but not the greatest, finishing 5th. Pretty solid. A lot of top 10s right here for Holmes. 5th at Kansas, 4th at Kansas for Joe Gibbs. Top 5s, and look at this one right here. 2023, last fall, Kansas, running for Joe Gibbs. Connor Mosak, a winner. Now he's going to be with Spire and their best equipment. It's a very interesting play. That's why we dig deep here at the Fantasy NASCAR podcast. That's why I create the Fantasy NASCAR spreadsheet, racefortheprize.com, racefortheprize.com. May package, $30. Venmo, PayPal, Cash App. Get this information, get this edge. I save you a lot of time, save you a lot of effort, make it easy. And when all those things happen, you have fun, you enjoy your Saturday night, you feel like you're in control. You didn't just blindly punch things into a $300 a month computer simulation. You spent $30, did the work, and enjoyed the work. You saved $270 this month. $270. And you did work, but you enjoyed it. You had fun looking it over the numbers. You had fun diving into, what was that Mosak did again? Oh, this could be an interesting guy. Hey, this is a guy I want to watch. This guy I want to root for. Now you're invested in the series. Now you're having fun. I spent $300 and I just got a bunch of lists of names and I don't know any of these drivers and I got it on my screen. I don't even know what I'm looking at. That's not fun. Who likes doing that? We talk racing. We buy in and we enjoy the races. Lane Riggs has been Lane Riggs. Not really that disappointing. Again, another one of these late model asphalt guys working his way up. We can't expect him to just jump into the front row truck and replicate what Zane Smith did over the last couple seasons. It's going to take him a while. And he is showing speed. And some of his issues he's had in mechanical situations and crashes that have hurt his races. Pit road issues. It is a top 10 truck. He is a top 10 driver. But he's not a top 5 driver yet. He'll get there. But this is a team kind of regrouping. They've got a new crew chief here. It's going to take them a while before they knock on the door to the top 4, top 5. But right now, top 10 truck, 7,700. I don't mind. Anytime you can get some place differential with Riggs, then we will be about it. But at his price now, as he starts closer to the front, it becomes much more difficult to roster him. But not that difficult, right? If we were going to consider Connor Mosack, then Rain Riggs is a guy that we need to consider. He has just as much upside as these next 3 drivers. Throw a blanket around them, 4 drivers, 3 former teammates, all really not showing us much, all mainly showing us pretty much their age. When Daily Fantasy NASCAR became a thing in 2019, these were our guys. Enfinger, Rhodes, Crafton leading the charge at Thor, Friesen really getting his team together and finding speed. And then for the next 4 years, they've just kind of aged out. They're there, but they're not the top 5 anymore. And they're borderline top 10. On any given week, one will show speed. And any given week, one can get into the optimal lineup. Not usually because of laps led, although Enfinger did have a solid 2023 race for a strongly funded GMS ride at Kansas. The Robaugh allied with McAnally truck with Stankiewicz as a crew chief has not been as fast as advertised. It's top 10. It's competitive. Maybe, again, this is a team. It's a new team for the most part, CR7. It's going to take them a while to grow. So to expect them to be top 5 is probably a little too aggressive. But top 10. Rhodes just can't get out of his own way. Team's plenty of issues. Crafton probably has been the best of them. Friesen kind of coming around at the moment and growing. But none are really threatening to knock out our top tier. And really the only way I want to get here is if I can absolutely get a lot of place differential out of these drivers. Otherwise, I would much rather spend for finishing position and a couple of place differential and a handful of fast laps. They're not eliminated because they are slightly cheap enough, and if one qualifies poorly, they can work. But when we're looking at hogs/dominators, Friesen, Crafton, Rhodes, Enfinger are no longer a part of that conversation. They still are viable in DFS because they have been marked down because of that situation. And it just comes down to place differential because they are still veteran drivers, all still in good equipment that is capable of knocking on the door of the top 5. And so point per dollar wise, they can work. But if they start a little close to the front and they can't quite get to that double-digit place differential mark, then I really got to get them out. Right now, like, for example, we've got Crafton finishing 10th, 34. Now, if he can get 8 place differential points, 5.3x, that can work. And he can actually probably get a couple more spots projection-wise. And I think that same thing can be said for all of these drivers. And so they're right there as a possible play. We move out to Brett Moffitt, former champion, jumping into a Tricon truck. Should be fast. We've seen plenty of drivers jump into the extra Tricon truck, the number 1, and get some solid results. It isn't going to be easy because he hasn't raced in quite a while, and his racing over the last couple seasons has been in a different vehicle in the Xfinity series. So it may take him some time to adjust. We may need to temper expectations in his first couple of runs, but we know he has the talent. We know the truck will have the speed. It's simply a matter of how quickly does he figure it back out. Truck really hasn't changed. It really shouldn't be the most difficult transition for him because of all of this experience. I would argue it's probably tougher right now for a Cup Series driver to jump into a truck than it would be for Brett Moffitt, simply because he has spent so much time in a truck. So if there was an occasion where a guy quickly figured it out faster than anyone else, Brett Moffitt could be that, but we're definitely not getting any bit of a discount for a guy that is coming in new. We'll see what he does in practice, how comfortable he looks. Again, if we say that these guys are hard to play because they can't lead laps and we need place differential from them, then that probably is going to apply again to Brett Moffitt. I do not expect a Kyle Busch type of performance where he just jumps into a truck and leads all the laps. Now, we could see he qualifies on the pole and is absolutely fast in practice. Tricon has arguably been the fastest trucks this season. So there is that scenario and there's that possibility. But I really probably categorize Moffitt with Infinger, Rhodes, and Crafton and Friesen, and that he can maybe knock on the door of the top 5. Who can give me the most place differential? Not really saving me any money. I'm starting to spend a lot here, and when I'm spending this much, kind of need to start getting some fast laps and laps led, which Ankrum could probably do, although he hasn't done yet. Top 10s last year for Hattori. Hattori didn't really have the best trucks in their final season. The Ankrum finished a little bit better than where he ran, but still produced pretty solid results at Kansas. You look at what he's done this year. He burned a lot of people in the last race. Maybe that's still sticking with them. But you look at the races that matter, and you look at driver rating, not just their finish. Second at Daytona and Atlanta. Oh, well, those don't matter. Okay, fine. 4th at Vegas. The 4th best driver at Bristol. The 4th best driver at Martinsville. McAnally has speed. Ankrum is coming into his own. You shake off Texas. If he is a top 5 driver like he should be, that's fast laps. If he's a top 5 driver, that could be a win at the end. And he is the cheapest of our top tier. And I know he doesn't get in the conversation with Heim, Eckes, and Sanchez, but he should be. He is right there. And he's giving you a big discount compared to Heim. And he doesn't necessarily need to lead laps like Heim will. If he's at Kansas, running in the top 5, he's going to get fast laps, ends up with a solid finish. He works. $200 to $2,000 in savings. He doesn't have to do what Heim does. Great play. Same can be said of Taylor Gray, my dark horse candidate. They finally have priced him up accordingly. Way too cheap last week. He was in the 7,000s. Going to be tougher to play him. But if Ankrum can run in the top 5, Gray can run in the top 5. They don't necessarily need to lead laps, but the opportunity will be there on the restarts to poke their head out and to be the winner on a restart and get a cycle of laps led, or scrape off some fast laps. Just get the solid finishes like they've been doing, and they work on a point per dollar perspective. You know, you could see Heim having a really good day, Eckes having a really good day, but them splitting up laps led, being too expensive, and our optimal lineup being more of the guys who were also having good days, but just were more efficient point per dollar wise. They didn't really lead, but were getting fast laps, get a couple place differential and a finishing position, and ended up making the optimal lineup work, whereas Heim and Eckes and the Sanchez split up a lot of the hog points, and that only one of them really can be optimal. And then one of them is often, typically what we're seeing is one hog. I mean, we're seeing 3 hogs, but in the optimal lineup, only one can fit because they all split these. And so they split the points. You can only afford one. And then you end up with a combination of Ankrum and Gray and guys running in the top 5 who just are better point per dollar plays. Carruth had that really good Las Vegas race. Texas, he was involved in that wreck at the very beginning with Tyler Ankrum. Then he spins, he rebounds, has a pretty good race. His speed is right there. I would slot him below Gray and Ankrum. I'd rather go to these 2 guys. But if he does qualify in the pole, he is worth consideration. I don't think I'm there yet. Majeski, at 9,700. Like I talked about earlier, maybe I'm a little too harsh, but he just has not shown the speed that the top tier guys have. And if I'm spending up this much, I think I want more of a guarantee of the drivers who are week in and week out leading laps. Not completely writing off Majeski. We'll see what he does, but I like the top a little bit better. Zane Smith could be a contender. Very solid Kansas results. Been pretty good this season. Not great. 5th highest rated driver. Again, a step behind these three. And if I'm spending this much, Zane Smith just got to show something in practice or qualifying that makes us believe that he can score more points than these drivers. Right now, where I stand, do I think Zane can outscore them? Probably not. Sanchez, Eckes, Heim, you pick. All are race winning capability, lap leading capability, top 3 trucks in the series. Ultimately, I think one will end up in the optimal lineup, and you won't be able to afford 2 of them. Could be 2. I expect at least 2 of these 3 to lead laps. And so I have no problem rostering 2 of them. But some of the patterns that we have seen in the past, only one work. It's just going to depend on qualifying and where the value shakes out. Typically, we don't get a lot of value in the truck series. They start and finish in the same spot. Your value, we don't get a bunch of value plays that open up or unlock the guys at the top because the value is 2 laps down and they just can't score a bunch of points. So hopefully that was helpful. Thanks for joining me. Love you guys. Blessed to have you. Triple Ice Fantastic.